discussion revolves around a simple but provocative question. Everything is compliant. Is that enough for the future of deals? Because we are honest, procurement has never been more structured. We have sourcing platforms, governance frameworks, compliance controls, approval workflows, and audit trails. Every decision can be justified, every process can be documented, every box can be checked. And yet, according to research from World Commerce and Contracting Organizations, lose nearly 9% of annual revenue because of ineffective contract management, while procurement contracts lose an average of 11% of their value after signature. Think about that. The deal is won, the contract is signed, the compliance process is complete, yet value continues to leak from the system. And for a company operating at a 15% EBITDA margin, losing 9% of revenue through poor commercial execution doesn't just slow growth, it can wipe out a significant portion of profitability, which raises an uncomfortable question. If compliance is working, why are outcomes still falling short? Perhaps it's because today's deals are fundamentally different from the deals procurement systems were originally designed for. Modern enterprise decisions involve technology risk, cybersecurity risk, supply chain volatility, AI investments, implementation complexity, and increasingly business outcomes rather than product purchases. So the decision is no longer simply about buying something, it's about betting on an outcome. And that's exactly what will explore today. So why does the L1 model continue to dominate sourcing, and where is it quietly failing? We are also going to look at what does intelligent deal making actually look like in practice. How can sellers compete on value when evaluation frameworks are still built around cost? And how can procurement leaders move beyond price-led decisions without losing control? Apart from that, we are also going to look at what structural, cultural, and mindset shifts are required if deals are to be decided by who thinks is smartest, not simply who bids lowest. To help us unpack these questions, I'm delighted to be joined by two accomplished leaders who have spent years navigating enterprise technology, procurement, sourcing, transformation, and commercial deal decision making. Please join me in welcoming Priti and Vipin Sahani to this 2020X Vision session. So, Priti and Vipin, welcome to the session.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you, Vishwendra. I'm glad to be here with all of you. And our
Thank you. Thanks. So, before we have an introduction, let me begin with an icebreaker question. And you have been in the you have been you have spent lot many years in the corporate world, and you have seen procurement frameworks, sourcing platforms, cybersecurity risk, and outcome-based contracts. But I'd like to start with something more fundamental. So when you are looking at navigating complex enterprise deals from different vantage points, you have a perspective which a lot of people actually who are there in the audience, miss that. So here's my opening question to both of you. What is the biggest lie we tell ourselves about how deals actually get done in B2B, right? So we can start with you, and you can also talk about yourself a little bit, and then respond to this question.
Thank you so much, Vishwendra, and hello to everybody on this. Did you tell me, Vishwendra, or was that Vipin who was supposed to speak? I thought it was me.
No, you go ahead, Preeti.
All right, okay. So a little bit about me. I worked in multiple firms, both on the technology side. First few years with the insurance world as an underwriter, and then moved to technology world. And worked in many companies, including multinationals like Microsoft, Oracle. Have been CEO of software firms like Birlasoft and Spice Telecom, basically DigiSpice, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to delve into my resume right now. You can look it up on the LinkedIn profile. But to your question, which is a very interesting one, Vishwendra, which is what is the biggest lie? I think the biggest lie about these deals that we do is responding to RFP the way it is. It is the biggest
Mm.
lie that we will win on solution and price. We will win on the best documents that we attach with our RFP. We will win on our accomplishments so far. No, there is a huge system. Is assume it's like a big television in front of you, and you see the RFP on the television. But behind the television is a real human ecosystem that needs to be addressed. And if one does not think of it, does not think of innovation to come into the combination, we don't address anything. It's finally a big paper tiger. So to me, that's the
Yes.
biggest lie. You never win deals with the left brain. You win it with the right brain.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a fascinating observation, and this is actually there are a lot of people who miss out, especially if they do not have, uh, if they have not worked on these kind of deals day in day out. So the deal. In fact, there's one gentleman who commented on the LinkedIn post yesterday. He said, deals RFPs do not actually start when we start, submitting those RFPs. The process of evaluation actually start way ahead in time. So obviously, what you said is absolutely right. Vipin, over to you. If you could talk about yourself and share your response to the question I asked.
Sure, Vishwendra. Thank you so much. Thanks, Priti. And this is Vipan Sahani. I've been into IT ever since I completed my graduation from Delhi College of Engineering, and I've had a long career, still active. I've started with CMC Limited and worked with many multinationals, including Siemens, etc. But like Priti said, without getting into my resume, I would rather attack the question that Vishwendra has put up in the first place. So we are talking about the biggest lie we tell ourselves. Let me quote from one of the stock market experts. In stock market, there is a seller and a buyer. Both of them believe that they've got the best deal. Now, how can that be possible? But that is where this myth of fooling yourself starts. The process of buying, like Vishwendra just said, starts much before the RFP is published. However, in current times, this also assumes additional avatar where a lot of information is available about both the vendor and the buyer. And you need to dig up the various platforms on the net, which will tell you more than what the eye can see as far as either of the party is concerned. So, information about your vendor, information about your buyer, these are two additional things that one needs to collect before you get into the deal. And this can be very very vast pool of information that you get, and then the process of filtering needs to be done so that this lie that we are telling ourselves that both of us have got a great deal has to be rested. Over to Vishwendra.
Thank you, Vipin, and thank you for sharing your profile too. So, what is interesting that both of you are pointing to the same underlying tension. Though the process has been designed to create objectivity, but what is what is what has been missing is the ecosystem that actually power the entire RFP process, apart from the key objective, which is the business outcome that are ultimately created by people. And now here is that tension more visible than in our first topic. So I'm going to move quickly to our next topic, which is why does L1 still dominate enterprise sourcing and where is it quietly failing? So in fact, when I was looking at some of the industry stats, I found that while L1 was designed to remove bias, increase transparency, and protect organizations from poor procurement decisions, but the outcomes tell a more complicated story. So there's a study done by KPMG recently. They studied almost around 1,800 large infrastructure projects in India, and they found that almost half were delayed, with average slippages of more than 3 years and cost overruns exceeding 4 lakh crore rupees. At the same time, during the recent AI infrastructure build out, NESCOM highlighted instances where DDR5 memory and SSD prices surged by as much as 300 to 400%, making fixed price contracts extremely difficult to execute by the suppliers who are providing these DDR5 and SSD. Moreover, there are of course alternative mechanisms like quality come cost-based selection or economically most advantageous tender exist within guidelines, but institutional inertia and the fear of audit accountability keep the flawed L1 methodology firmly entrenched. So though the process remain compliant, the economics are changing, the delivery realities are changing. Vipin, this question is to you. So, inside procurement systems themselves, how does this design bias reinforce bad habits? And where do the biggest blind spots emerge after a contract award?
So, Vishwendra, thank you so much. That's a very pertinent question to today's topic here. And we don't need to look too further. Last since 28th of February, we all know what has happened to the world. And just look at the oil contracts. Do you think fixed annual pricing or the insurance cover that they have taken will make sure of the delivery? And what we have seen is that these long-term contracts, which are for a commodity which is physical, which is visible, which is the lifeline of today's modern society, could have survived. So it is very obvious that the fallacy of fixed price contract is actually slowly diminishing. And the deals go beyond price today. Any oil that has to move from Strait of Hormuz today, I didn't even know Strait of Hormuz existed before 28th of February. Now what you need to see is that the long-term contracts or the insurance cover or the time of delivery or the viability of the supplier, all of these are under a shroud of question mark as to what are all that we need to take care of as a buyer. So we belong to a country who's waking up from being a nation that also ran to a nation that is leading today. You've seen that we built oil reserves. We have seen oil reserves in caverns, in natural caverns, and all this is pointing to just one thing: that fixed price contracts are not going to suffice. We need to look at the supply chain. We need to look at the transport logistics. We also need to look at insurance. We also need to look at the routes that these take. So, having said that, Vishwendra, what I would feel is that these price contracts are now a thing of the past. One needs to factor in the other logistics, existential issues that will happen. If the loading port at Iran is destroyed, now that doesn't mean that Iran ceases as a country. However, the ability to deliver is not limited. So, understanding the understanding the uh, logistics behind all of this, one needs to go beyond the price sensitivity and look at how value can be added to a delivery or to a product which is continuously required. This was one example. Now, this has a cascading effect. If you can't get fuel, you can't run your factories. If you can't run your factories, the smaller guys will have a difficult time adjusting. And there is a dominoes effect wherein the entire world's economy was being threatened because of just one act that happened.
Mm.
I do think that addresses what you said.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Vipin. Yes, while the systems are, might be exceptionally good, but we are still far away in terms of aligning these systems or the frameworks that we have to the market ecosystem, and that's where the most of the failure happens. And this not only actually is a cause of failure, but there is also delay, rework, or non-delivery. As I talked about, the infrastructure projects delay. Almost 50% of the infrastructure projects have been delayed due to that reasons. But yes, that's the challenges with the complex transformation projects. So before I move to Preeti, I'd like to request the audience to share their questions or any insights that they have, which they like to share with us, because we will address their questions live during this conversation. We already received a couple of questions. We have a question from Vijay Sabarwal that will be addressing during the course of this discussion. But in the meantime, if you have any more questions, do share with us, and we are going to pick those questions too as we move forward. So, Preeti, this is with reference to the conversation that we had earlier, and one of the most misunderstood realities of enterprise buying is that decisions rarely happen inside the RFP alone, as you talked about. And looking at the research that shows that for enterprise technology investments above $100,000, CFO involvement is now common in almost 80% of the cases. So the deal may begin in procurement, but eventually finance, operations, technology, security, legal, and other business stakeholders all become part of the decision. Um, and this buying process becomes an internal negotiation long before it becomes a vendor negotiation. So, since you talked about looking beyond the written RFP, when technical scores are broadly similar, decisions often come down to confidence, trust, and organizational dynamics. So, how do intelligent deal makers identify the real influencers, budget owners, and decision makers who ultimately shape the direction of a deal?
Right. Thank you, Vishwendra. Uh, this reminds me of a very interesting story that when I was the CEO of a mid-sized IT firm, and where once we had one very large client, and from their healthcare division we received a very very large RFP, something that we had not attempted before. So we got all of the team, typical architects and testers and program managers and all of them into one room, and we said, why don't we get together and try to respond to an RFP? Now, obviously, the organizations still hadn't learned to go earlier in the earlier stages, but we were competing with some of the very large vendors. So he said, how do we compete for that? And as the team was trying to respond to the RFP question, saying we did this and we can't do this, and how do we respond to a question that's a little tricky for us, and so on. Uh, One of the things that we noticed was that one guy, a very young fellow, he stood up and asked a question. Incidentally, we used to have what we call an awesome team, which means organization of strategic management. We used to call those 7, 8 people who were in that group, and they were all youngsters, very different thinkers. So one of them asked, who are we addressing this RFP to? And the immediate response was CIO. And that's what everybody thinks because the CIO has given you the RFP. But actually, then he asked, and why is CFO the sponsor? And then that struck everybody. Yes, why is the CFO the sponsor? To your point just now. And then, things started changing. It started looking into the entire RFP, and the questions came up. Why is CHRO asking about adoption and user change when he's changing the ERP? It was about change of ERP system. Why is the CEO thinking about a business transformation, digital adoption, and so on and so forth? Everybody had a different one, and then it struck everyone that if you read it through, you realize that every requirement has a different stakeholder. It has a stakeholder behind it. Every stakeholder has an objective which is literally different from each of the others. And then every objective has a measurable success criteria. So don't respond to the RFP questions as if it's just paper. Respond to the human system or the human ecosystem that exists behind that. Try to understand their Vipin, which is what is in it for me, for each of those people. And then you try and respond and curate your responses to that. Eventually, we did win that RFP, but the point was what it went through was our own transformation in responding to that RFP. So I think it's very, very important that we look beyond the document and look at the people who actually dirtied their hands in creating that RFP. The digital footprint or the fingerprints of those people is sitting all over the RFP. It is just that we need the lens to look at it. I think that's a very, very important thing. So, a traditional deal would cover price, but an intelligent deal would cover the stakeholders and the outcomes that they intend to have. Thank you.
So if I have a follow-up question. If when we are, looking at various stakeholders, like you highlighted the hidden human network behind every major decision or major deals, um, is there a way to identify these stakeholders before you start responding to the RFP or before you start working on the RFP? Is there a way to identify who are the stakeholders, key stakeholders that are involved, or you get to know about these stakeholders once you get into meeting with the client?
No, I think you can. That's what I said. The footprint or the fingerprints of those who have been involved in the RFP. It requires a little seasoning, but you can read it through. When it touches the people angle, there is definitely a CHRO involved. When it touches the, let's say, process, there is definitely an operations team involved. When it touches a financial closure, let us say, I'm just giving an example. There could be so many, things that CFO could be looking for. He could be looking for what's my working capital requirement and how is it affected by this RFP. So look for these kind of telltale signs and at least build a map. That is number one, a stakeholder map. Having built that stakeholder map, go to the CIO with the proposition that we'd like to meet each of these stakeholders. No, CIO in his good sense. I mean, we say that the CIO will block the meetings with the rest of the people. Have an intelligent discussion. The CIO always talks to the intelligent vendors. They don't talk to the vendor, as we call it, who just come with about selling the box. So get into an intelligent conversation, and a typical CIO would love to do that. Frankly, I would say that if you get a toxic CIO in front of you, don't attempt that deal. It's a waste of time for everybody, especially if it's a large one, because you're not going to win. Probably the winner could be an entity that has already written the RFP, that has been set up for, and so, don't waste your time. You're not going to win. But if you want to learn, go through the process. At least learn the process so that next time you start earlier, you start with the right framework, and you respond to the real people on the table.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned about a toxic CIO. So how do you identify a toxic CIO?
See, toxic CIO happens a lot of times, and the first thing, one has to look for is he an enabler or is he a blocker, as far as you are concerned as a vendor. If he's a blocker in uh, any kind of discussion that you want to have is being either sidelined or it's not ready, or just trying to find flaws, as opposed to saying, why don't you try this and bring it back to me next week, I'd like to take a look at it, because typically these processes are not like 15 days, they do take time. So I think that is important. If it's an already existing account and you are farming into that account, then you would have enough knowledge. If it's a new account, then you have to discover, and maybe you might not make it, but you'll definitely learn from there. Toxic CIO has few other, if you look at it, a little homework around the toxic CIO with other stakeholders in the organization gives you a sense as to how that person is looked upon, and there are giveaways. So these discussions may not happen within the organization, but they definitely happen outside the organization over a cup of coffee or tea or whatever. One has to understand the human behavior. Without understanding human behavior, you cannot front end or solve for a team.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Preeti. So, since you talked about the human network, let me come back to the digital network and ask a question to Vipin. So, Vipin, you have seen procurement systems, digital ecosystems, and there are risks also involved with these systems that are being used for procurement, or for when you are kind of um, sharing your proposal, or your um, solution. So what are the hidden vulnerabilities around these systems? They are privileged users, they are internal data exposure, platform governance that organization often overlook. So what are those vulnerabilities um, that the procurement and the supplier team should be mindful of?
Sure, Vishwendra. That is a very pertinent question with relevance to technology being a procurement enabler today. Now, you see, if you go back to the old system where public procurement used to happen in a closed room with a sealed tender method, where you could put your financial bids and technical bids in a box. That box was opened in presence of the participants, and then each of the bids were read out, and that was a physical process that was happening, which was supposed to be transparent. However, we have had zillions of incidents where this process has been defeated by so many ways. One is collisions, another is collisions. So that is where electronic tendering, this is or procurement system over platforms, SaaS platforms came in. Now, when you move into SaaS platforms, doing business over a computer in a remote location is not the only solution of guarantee of your data not being compromised. Just imagine there's data at rest, there's data in motion, and all of these places are where your data can be compromised. Now, just imagine you have a internal IT department who's subscribed to a SaaS platform, and one of your IT support team is operating a tender submission on one of these platforms. Now, firstly, that is one data leak point. Secondly, this data now moves over the net and lands on the SaaS platform's desk. This is data in motion, which was another point where this could be compromised. Although it requires a lot of technical input, but yes, the possibility exists. And then it lands on a SaaS platform's database and stays there for, let's say, a week or so. Now, this SaaS platform is being operated by another agency, and they always have a database administrator who has the access to the database. So that is your another vulnerability point. Now, these are enough for any compromise of data to happen. However, technology today gives you ample of opportunities to plug these holes. Now, what you can do is the first point of data leakage that we identified was the bidder's end. This can be controlled by a physical environment using CCTVs and ensuring that the data that is being fed into the system is not being copied or being penciled away. At the end of the day, price of a competitor matters. Secondly, when it is traveling, it has to be encrypted. Now comes the third part, where the encryption has to happen at the database end. Now, whatever technology you may use, that data decryption technology at the platform's end rests with the platform supplier. So how does one take care of this? It's a complicated science, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of some discussions and implementation where a very innovative trick was invented, which is data encryption at source. So data encryption at source means the bidder encrypts the data and keeps the key with himself. This key is supplied to the SaaS platform operator only when the tendering opening event is happening electronically. So by that, what you have done is you have secured your data at the bidder's point, which is data at rest. It is encrypted and the key is with the bidder. Now, when it travels over the net, it is encrypted. It cannot be decrypted without this key. So you have sealed that data in motion. It lands onto the platform's database. The database administrator again is helpless in looking at this data. because the encryption key is with the bidder himself. Now, at the point of time when the tender opening is happening, now we all will be attending this remotely. That is when the bidder supplies the key to the evaluating agency, and this unlocks the data in the database. So we've been able to, by this technology, able to ensure that data at rest, in motion and again at rest, is being taken care of. So this is quite an innovative way, and we all know that public key infrastructure supports data protection in motion, but it doesn't protect the data protection at the SQL level on the platform side, and
Yeah.
that is where bidders encryption key comes in. So you have a dual two-level security, bidders key and PKI. So that
Yeah.
is one of the ways, and there are many other ways, but yeah, this is one of the safest ways and in not very expensive to be able to do this.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, you're right. So yes, there are challenges, but there are solutions too to address the challenges that are being faced. Um, and at the same time, the transparency can be maintained too by following some of the solutions. So let me quickly move to the next theme, which is how to especially talking about the value, how to compete on value when evaluation is still built around cost, which is the foundation for Elvin, um, uh, um, the Elvin framework. So most buyers say they want innovation, and most sellers, when they communicate, they say they deliver outcomes. Yet, procurement systems continue to compare suppliers primarily on cost. So, at the same time, say AI is changing the economics of delivery that we all have seen, have heard about. Recently, there was a certain estimation that has been shared by BCG and McKinsey. So, BCG estimates that AI-enabled procurement can reduce costs by 15% to 45%, while McKinsey estimates productivity improvements of up to 40%. So, in theory, suppliers should now be able to deliver better outcomes faster and at lower operational effort, as what these studies uh, highlighted. But many still struggle to communicate that value. So my question is to Preeti. So you earlier talked about that great vendors absorb 60 to 70% of the implementation burden. So clients aren't overwhelmed by a second full-time job. So how do sellers demonstrate this capability during technical evaluation before pricing discussions begin?
Right. It's a very, very interesting question, and sometimes vendors miss out on that, especially the tech vendors I'm talking about, because my experience is largely there. So here's the thing, when you are responding to an RFP, few things one has to bear in mind. Look at all the you just spoke about, even earlier you talked about the fact that many of the projects fail, or they are overrun, and hence value is not demonstrated, or somebody has to absorb that risk, whether it is the customer or the client or the vendor. Now, at the time of discussions, during the RFP process, it's very important to not just focus on the price, but to talk about the hidden costs. There are a whole bunch of hidden costs. When one implements, first of all, the scope itself. Scope is the center point of leakage and I have been through one such inherited deal, which was done with the government of India, and you kept leaking and you kept leaking and kept paying penalties till you said enough is enough. I want to get out of this contract and hand it over to some other guy who can take it forward from there and restructure the deal. We were not allowed to restructure the deal either. So, don't get into such situations where the leakage becomes so huge that you are literally begging for mercy. Uh, so, my point, coming back to the question that you just asked, one such hidden cost is scope. The second very important hidden cost is at the time of evaluation, the customer looks at what you call, do you have the domain expertise or are you a horizontal tech player whom we have to tell every step of the solution. So, sometimes it's like a mix of, oh, we'll get you the best, expert. We will go and hire somebody last minute, who will be part of our domain solution and so on and so forth. It's I can tell you, it's beginning of the disaster. It doesn't work if you're not embedded into that particular that particular domain, or if the customer is not ready to sponsor just because they like your technology, they are ready to invest into a domain. Try to bring in domain expertise much earlier into the cycle who's embedded with your platform.
Hmm.
Now, what happens? What does that do? There is a huge cost of the customers' experts who are, anyways, doing a day job, and they want the solution to be implemented, but they have to do a night job. In few countries like ours, it may work. Sometimes people don't mind working, overtime, but that doesn't work in the Western world at all. So they have to be incentivized, they have to be given some extra whatever, to be able to be a part of the solution. So it is very important that if we can let them not have to do a night job and make do with a day job with just little once a week instructions from them on whether we are going right or not as a vendor. I think
Hmm.
that's a very huge hidden cost that if you calculate it in your TCO, which doesn't
Yeah.
get calculated. TCO means just plus, plus, plus infrastructure, plus this, plus, all those costs which are obvious,
Hmm.
but these are hidden costs. Scope, lack of scope clarity, lack of availability of domain expertise from either of the sides, the clear cut who's going to be responsible for what, accountability, if not set in the beginning, will have leakages. And
Yeah.
there are many more factors. But just to answer to your point, which is very pointed.
Absolutely. In fact, what you said is certainly many buyers face, and especially the domain expertise. I've also myself experienced when buyers are asking question about domain, whether the vendors or the suppliers have their your hands-on experience in their specific domain, and because they are they are looking for that confidence. They are looking for those suppliers who have that understanding of the ecosystem that they are operating in. So yeah, that's they not only they are not they rarely purchase solution, they purchase confidence that the solution will work in their ecosystem. So that's what they are looking for.
Yes, and
uh,
that's what builds trust and partnership.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So let me move to Vipin. Vipin, one reason value conversation often fail is that procurement systems have fees for price, but rarely for speed, quality, adoption, risk reduction. Those areas which can actually build that trust. So if AI can reduce procurement costs by say 15% to 45% and improve productivity by 40%, or accelerate implementation timelines, how should sellers convert those benefits into financial language that CFOs or the procurement leaders and buying committees can objectively evaluate? So, and it can be also shared through the procurement systems that are in place.
So that's a difficult one, Vishwendra. Now, the ability to translate using technology, the inputs that you give into the technology, into a measurable quality and performance index is a difficult job. Now, this is like evaluating how has a, let's say, moving to the cloud benefited the anybody who has moved to the cloud. What are his savings that he has been accrued by that? So when we move into today's world where electronic procurement is happening, like you rightly pointed out, the three pillars of delivery: price, quality, and time. These three are always out of sync, and it is impossible to bring them together. Impossible may be a wrong word, but it is difficult to bring them to order. And this is where technology can actually help you out. Let us look at quality first. Quality is a measurable index by virtue of so many testing facilities being available. Price is of course discovered when you have a bidding or a supplier who is already committed to you. Then comes the performance, time management. This
Mm.
is this is where most of the play will happen, or the sanctity will be lost. Let's look at how physical infrastructure is being built. You have a procurement, you have a procurement process which talks about building a bridge between two, let's say, two cities, or let's say even a small flyover between two given points. So there is some quality that you associate with brands, that you have to use 43 grade cement, you have to use XYZ bore uh, steel structures, etc., etc. That can
Yeah.
be ensured at the site. Next is price. Price you've already fixed because you have a bidding mechanism, which is competitivity. Now comes the time delivery. We have seen over last 40 years that India has been building infrastructure which has never been delivered on time. It's not a complaint, but that is an observation. Now this leads to price escalation, and this leads to deterioration of quality.
Mm.
Now, unless we balance time, these two parameters which we thought were under control are also now out of sync. So if you delay a flyover between 2 points, there is a cost being incurred by the commuters who are using that particular route. There's a cost being incurred by the service provider, let's say the municipal corporation, and there is a price that the vendor is paying because he is not going to lay off his labor, as there are certain contracts binding that as well. So
Mm.
time has become a spoiler here. Now the trick then lies in evaluating that what is my time cost that is happening. It may not be simply a summation of various costs that have happened, but just look at the amount of fuel we waste when we are idling at a traffic jam. And if you
Yeah.
are a traveler to between Delhi and Gurgaon, you can well imagine what it is happening where you can see thousands of vehicles stranded, but all of them having their engines and air conditioners running. Now the time delay is not only causing a financial loss to the vendor, to the process owner, which is the, let's say, the highway National Highway Association. It is also causing indirect losses in terms of fuel that we are burning standing at such crossings. And fuel being a very dear commodity, as we've seen in the last few months. It's not been a dear commodity forever, but last few months have taught us a lot of new lessons. Now these are hidden costs as well, which need to be addressed. And this
Correct.
is so this is these are some of the areas that one needs to evaluate when you're looking
Mm.
at electronic procurement. Price
Yes.
is not only one single determinant, there are quality and there are time implications which also have indirect bearing on cost that the nation is bearing.
Mm.
And now one needs to
Absolutely.
take care of all of these when you are looking at how my TQM are being balanced.
Correct. Yes, exactly. So yeah, that's a great point. And there's a question that I received from Vijay Sabarwal on LinkedIn earlier. So I'm going to also pick that question here. But in the meantime, while I'm going to talk about that question, I request audience to share their questions in the comment section uh, uh, of the event page, so that we can pick those questions, and we can ask those questions live to our speakers. So the question that we have received from Vijay Sabarbal is about a case study that he referred to, wherein AI and agentic AI help unlock over 250 basis points of margin improvement through intelligent pricing decisions. And while the outcomes are compelling, uh, his question is primarily, what are these practical nuts and bolts that are required to make such intelligent decision making work in reality? And what data governance processes and organization changes are needed to move from price-led decisions to value-led outcomes at scale? I think we have already covered the second part of it, but the first part is primarily in terms of the practical nuts and bolts which are required to make such intelligent decision making work in reality, especially when we are looking at unlocking 25 basis points of margin improvement or improvements on EBITDA through intelligent pricing decisions. So what are those nuts and bolts, if you can, throw some light on.
So, Vishwa, that is another superb query that you have put to Googly, and I will take up from where I'll pick up the threads from where I just left with respect to your last question: time, quality, and price.
Hmm.
Now, we were trying to discuss how this can be quantified, and that is exactly what this question is about. That what are the nuts and bolts that we can put in place? So, if you just go back a few minutes earlier, I was talking about time, which is causing delays and causing monetary loss or an outcome loss to all the parties that are concerned: the consumer, the service provider, and the infrastructure builder.
Hmm.
Now, what we discovered here was that time delays cause many folds of losses, quantifiable losses. One of the abilities of electronic business is that we can speeden up the things. So
Hmm.
shortening the time between bidding and award of contract should be a part of your process. And this contractual engagement there should be a contracts module also a part of your electronic tendering process, so that the award can be translated into a deliverable immediately. So we are saving time here, maybe a week or two or maybe a month. However, it
Hmm.
is these small bits that add up to make a big difference. This is one of the things that comes to my mind as a knee-jerk reaction. And
Hmm.
I would request, you know, that such questions are very pertinent. And one is time that you can handle, shorten the time between uh, bidding and award of contract. And then we must be able to put enough locks in place where this time adherence to the delivery is part of your contractual deliverables. It is only a
Correct. Yeah.
process of quantifying, what are the variable parameters within the three pillars, which is time, quality, and price.
Hmm.
So I'm talking about time here. Priti is raising her hand. I'm sure she has something else to add to it.
Sure. Preeti, do you have any comment to this
Yeah, thank
question?
you. Thank you, Mr. Sani, and thank you, Vishwendra. Here's a quick thought. Um, let's take an example of because I come from the insurance world, so I'll take that example of auto insurance. All of us get our automobiles, whether it's a two-wheeler or four-wheeler, whatever, insured with an insurance company. The biggest problem insurance company faces is at the time of claim, because that's where the entire process happens. How agentic AI helps over there? What it can do is a few things. For example, it can quickly pick up the first notice of loss and immediately respond back to. So that's one role of agentic AI. So the turnaround time, as Mr. Soni was talking about, is the time that impacts it. The second is ability to consume loads of data and convert it into a recommendation. For instance, if you're seeing that garages are overcharging for any changes, the tie-up garages, an agentic AI can behave like an investigator on that and see whether there is an increase. Now think about the number of cars on the road today, and think about the numbers of models, and think about the number of parts each one has. You think of the number of permutation combinations that are there, that are humanly very difficult to compute.
Hmm. Hmm.
Agentic AI can quickly do a turnaround. Otherwise, typically, a claims person or an officer would be looking at Excel sheets and analyzing what is the market rate, what have these people charged. It's a humongous task. Third,
Yes.
very important, I'm just giving three examples. The third one, there are a lot of fraud rings. If anybody who's done AML software and all would know that these rings are certain types of people who engage together to create what do you call, false claims, right? Or very exaggerated claims. For instance, a claim only covers what happened during the accident, not a wear and tear of the past 2 3 years. But what this one can do is, just by looking at pictures, just by looking at all the data information that has flowed in, it can easily respond and look at all the people who are repeatedly doing this, which could be investigator, agent, police report guys, and you find that locations, all these things put together, it can quickly respond, which takes huge amount of time. And because the penalty for doing these kind of activities is not typically taken to court by insurance companies because of relationships, etc., they they refrain from doing any punitive action. The only thing
Mm.
is you reject the claim. So
Yeah.
they are more and more, motivated to do it. Chalo, somewhere it'll strike, and
Mm.
we'll make big money. So I think these are the three areas where just think about the huge compute capability. Think about the turnaround time to do that. Think about the cost of the investigating units, which are very expensive, by the way.
Mm.
So, put it all together and you see, just for the claims process, you have three agentic AIs, or maybe
Yeah.
the same agentic AI performing different personas, and that's it. You have a huge value.
Yeah, thank you, Preeti, for sharing those examples, and thank you, Vipin. Since we have only a few minutes left, I'm going to quickly go through some of the questions that I have. So one of the, the paradoxes of enterprise procurement is that organizations often want startup innovation, but evaluate suppliers using criteria that only large incumbents can satisfy. PT, since you talked about agentic AI, and you might have seen, you have been working with a couple of startups too. So, how can enterprises create safer entry points for innovative startups while still protecting themselves from risk? Or how startups, sorry, how innovative startups can, you know, can create a landing spot to enter through the procurement process in the enterprises.
Right. Thank you, Vishwendra. See, forward-looking enterprises are already doing a bit of that. They are looking at innovative sandboxes, pilots. They are looking at hackathons, outcome-based programs, and so on and so forth. The challenge that I see is that they deal with an SI and with a startup separately. The idea of having a startup working with what do you call a large SI is tough for the startup, because most they are squeezed out of any kind of margins. They say, we are giving you an opportunity, you better deal with it. That's what happens with SIs. On the other side, qualification with most organizations does not happen, because the typical qualification is based on the number of years of experience, what is your team size, what's your revenue size, how many implementations have you done. Any new kind of startup might not have as many implementations to talk about. So pilots are the way to go. One of the things that organizations could do, and I'm coming from the organization side, is pick up a very small outcome, very, very small outcome, like how can we do invoices 30% faster on turnaround time, and make the vendor or the startup vendor do that, build it as a pilot. Now, one question that comes up, and I've seen that a lot, is that we're not going to pay for it. You are getting an opportunity, you pay for it. So if you look at it, the startups keep getting that hit. So unless they are a highly what you say, invested upon startup, or they have to figure out whether to do it or not, whether they can afford it. So I
Yeah.
think one of the changes that needs to happen is on the client side, to create a program outreach for the best in value. It's not about whether I choose an SI or whether I choose a startup. It has to be a combination. Both have their, capabilities. Today, if you see, I think we as a country mostly, I'm not saying about every organization, but you look at the share value of the IT stocks. Why is it falling? Because we are delayed in that exercise, big time delayed. Now we are waking up, but we are waking up only when the lag indicators have hit us. It should have happened when the lead indicators were already showing. So I think time to innovate, whether it has happened overseas, whether it has happened in India, but it's big vendors, SIs can push it with the customers that will get you a combination. So it's time for best of breed. and not just either this or that, because they both bring different capabilities to the table. One brings innovation, quick thinking. Was it the average age of startups is very, very less, so they are very innovative, big innovative thinkers. But on
Yeah.
the other side, these guys, the big SIs, bring stability. They bring huge amount of experience. They bring scale, so they can, and a huge integration capability, which startups cannot do. So these
Mm.
guys have to work together, and it has to be a good WIFM for all of them. There is no freebie out here.
Yeah.
That's what I want to leave it on the table.
Yeah, no, thank you, Preeti. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. And I'm going to come to the last question, which is, if you could share any real-world examples that can best demonstrate the shift from, say, price-first thinking to value-first thinking, especially in these, in these procurement cycles. I understand you did talk about earlier. You did share a few case studies with me, but if you could share those case studies here, that will be great. So, Vipin, maybe you can talk about that electricity procurement case study which could actually demonstrate the shift from price first thinking to value first thinking.
Sure, Vishwendra. Thank you so much. This is something that I've been a part of, and I'm happy to share my experiences here. Now, electricity procurement in India is again a laggard. However, as soon as the solar energy or alternate energy started to come in, whether it is from wind or whether from sea farms or from solar, there is a perishable commodity that is being produced, and the storage cost of that perishable commodity, which is electricity, is very high. The batteries are expensive. So you need to procure electricity, and it is also dependent upon certain weather phenomena, and weather, as you know, is quite unpredictable.
Hmm.
Now, in one of the particular cases where electricity procurement was being handled, it was very clear that we cannot go with the L1 because the demand of electricity may not be, one supplier may not be able to fulfill it. So you have a reverse auction mechanism as part of these procurement cycles, wherein multiple vendors can participate and bid for smaller buckets that they fill. Let's say you are procuring 10,000 megawatts of electricity. I have a solar farm which is producing 3,000. PP has a solar farm which is producing 5,000. You have a electricity farm which is producing, let's say, 500 megawatt. All three of us are participants to this, in addition to some big players. So some part of that electricity order goes to me, although I may not be L1. Some of it goes to PP, some of it goes to you, and some of it goes to large players. And all of us contribute to building that. And the average price is the average mathematical average of the 4 or 5 suppliers that you have. Now, in this fashion, you have beaten the L1 issue, but you have also taken into account the timeliness of delivery of a perishable commodity which cannot be stored, and you have been able to create an environment where L1 is not the only criteria, but capacity, ability, and the strength to deliver. And this is something that has practically happened. And without naming any organization, the regulators have been able to achieve this in our country, record levels of low price bidding.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks, Vipin. Preeti, if you could, draw from examples where rigid enterprise systems actually enable innovation. You did earlier talk about Microsoft's collaboration with McLaren. So, if you could share that case study.
Yes, of course. So I think one of the very unique things that was done was teaming up with a large car manufacturer. This was a time when India was beginning to take leaps of faith with itself in Make in India. And the car manufacturer felt that when you look at all the brands that are flowing into the country, we actually don't have a good branding. We don't have very smart vehicles. We just have some, let's call it dabbas at that point of time. With the ability to drive and the basic things like, the steering and the chassis and the, the stick shift version, not even an automated version and all that. So it so happened that once the discussions started, we said let us understand the mindset of these people, and there were, exactly as I said earlier, multiple stakeholders. But the whole idea was about changing the branding and changing the way the youngsters looked at it. Their vehicles were seen as more of oldie people vehicles, and that obviously would not lead to growth. So when we had that briefing, in Seattle, frankly, and that's when we came to a decision that we'll do something very interesting as a supercar. We will not come out with ideas of what each version should look like, but it is a some superset of everything that can happen in a supercar, and it won't be really sold for the heck of it. It will be sold in very very small editions to known people by invitation. Eventually, the subsequent versions would be babies of this supercar. There would be different versions, smaller versions based on the response that we got from the supercar thing. So we created what we called a Forza racing expertise we put inside the vehicle, and there were many other features like AI driven. And this I'm talking about almost 10 years, 8, 9 years ago, when AI driven cars were not that popular. And it was so exciting. It wasn't very expensive, but it came out. We had to go to Turin. The team had to go to Turin to look at the Fiat engines, Lamborghini, like the butterfly doors and all that, all the works. Of course, the vehicle softwares were all provided by the large player, the large automobile manufacturer, the OEM. And then eventually it was released at Geneva with one of the very well known footballers who recently attended India, and unlocked, or a fita cutting or ribbon cutting happened there. So it was a very exciting, different kind of a deal. And the business analyst there was, I won't name, but I guess everybody will understand, was an F1 car racer from India. So it was highly, highly innovative. And that innovation is what led to creation of that vehicle. Uh, it was heavily paid for from a cost perspective. But from the outcome that was gotten by putting those vehicles on the road and taking a feedback, and that's what you see on the roads today by that huge manufacturer, it's completely a game changer. We see new designs, we see a whole lot of Indians now gunning for them. Earlier, we had some two to three large companies, and now, of course, we may have some 15, 20 organizations selling their vehicle, but it is pretty much in the race now. Considering the cost, considering the features, considering how much appeal it has to the youngsters. So
Yes.
I think that's a very very beautiful case study. I cherish it in my mind as to how we could create a deal like that. Very expensive deal, but I'm sure it has already given ROI to the organization by now, big time.
Yes, absolutely. And these kind of deals are sometimes considered as strategic. So it not only in the financial terms it's kind of adding value, but strategically as well. In terms of your brand, in terms of reputation, when you're building such kind of deals, that actually gives you more leeway and get you your help you open doors in other organizations. So yeah,
That's
these
right.
are some of the innovative way that organizations, especially startups, should look at emulating some of these practices. Of course, it requires bigger ecosystems, but yes, there are a lot of innovations that are happening, especially when we are talking about intelligent deal making. So thank you, Preeti, for sharing these insights.
Thank you.
We have received one comment from Atreya. Just quickly share. This is all about AI. So one key area where AI should be deployed first is incoming information gateway. Many big organizations do not give board numbers, or people are not able to cross the reception gate. So an AI agent receiving all inbound calls and mails, interacting, evaluating, and then sorting according to requirements, quality, urgency, relevance, and all. So yeah, it's a very long comment, but it's also it's more of an application of AI, especially the voice agents that can actually help open doors. So as we bring the discussion to a close, let me summarize today's conversation into a practical framework, which will be of great help to the audience who joined us live, and to the audience who would watch these sessions later on. So step one: look beyond the document. Understand the hidden buying ecosystem, not just the written RFP. Step two: measure outcomes, not just costs. Evaluate delivery capability, adoption risk, implementation burden, and business impact. Step three: quantify value. And you can quantify value by translating speed, quality, risk reduction, and expertise into economic outcomes. Step four is assess ecosystem risk. Look beyond project scope to vendor health, supply chains, platform security, and operational resilience. Step five is create shared accountability. Um, so move toward models where buyers and sellers are jointly aligned around outcomes. And this is especially critical when we are talking about outcome-based scenarios, especially for procurement, which has been discussed recently. Step six is make compliance the foundation and not the destination, because compliance protects deals. It does not guarantee success. With this, we are going to sign off with this session. So today's discussion leaves us with one important takeaway, which is the future belongs to organization that can balance governance with agility, compliance with intelligence, and cost with outcomes. My sincere thanks to Preeti and Vipin for sharing their experience, insights, real world case studies, and practical wisdom with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us live from around the world and contributed to questions and perspectives here in the live session. Especially my thanks to Vijay Agarwal and Atreya. Um, Thank you, all of you. And I'll like to invite all of you to our next 2020 exhibition session, which is on July 16th. The theme of that session is AI. Everyone has it. Why are so many businesses still losing? So we are going to look at the great B2B commercial deal reset, what buyers value, what sellers missed, and why deals stall. So we'll explore how AI is reshaping commercial decision making, why deals continue to stall despite unprecedented access to technology, and what buyers and sellers must do differently to win the next era of B2B growth. So until then, keep questioning assumptions, keep challenging conventional wisdom, and keep building smarter businesses. We are reachable on LinkedIn, so you will see our LinkedIn handles on the LinkedIn event page. You can reach out to Vipin, Preeti, if you have any further questions. Thank you again, and thank you Vipin and Preeti for joining this session. We look forward to seeing you again in the next session.
Thanks,
Thank
Vishwa.
you very
Thanks to the
much.
audience. And
Thank you
thanks,
to the
Preeti.
audience.
It was
Thank you to
interesting.
you, Vishwendra.
Thanks, everybody.